Hi, welcome to Bad Music Taste, another ways to ruin your life. My name is Dom.
And my name is Sam. Dom has this week's record.
This week's record is The Kids Will Have Their Say by SSD. This record first came out in 1982 and was re-released last year on Trust Records. These are not first pressings, but this album is very near and dear to my heart. Moving on from that, this week's guest is Pat Flynn of like a million different bands, but most notably Have Heart and Fiddlehead. How's it going, Pat?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me. I think you guys got a great show, and I, I I love that you do like a record of the week thing. It feels pretty classic to do that.
Thank you. I brought up that record because I saw your One Two Me You interview with Al Baril on Trust Records, and it got me thinking. So, how do you perceive the evolution of the Boston hardcore scene over the years, and what do you believe are its current driving forces?
Oh wow. I think Boston is super interesting, and it doesn't exist without Al. Uh, like uh, I was really nervous to do that interview with him. I don't know how you guys do it. I've been listening to a lot of your episodes since you hit us up, and you have great questions, and it feels very organic and natural. And I hope you continue to do it. By the
Thank
way, because
you.
I I Joe Nelson had asked me to do an interview with Al Baril, and I had never spoken to Al Baril ever. Like I just knew him as like this, to kind of answer your question, like it begins with him. Like he is the he there is no Boston hardcore without him. If like I teach history, and one of the ways in which you can kind of measure the historical significance of something is to play a counterfactual, which is like, if this didn't exist, then how might things be different? And you can never know for sure, but it is very easy to make the case, more than reasonable, that if you take Alberil out of the equation, then you so much is missing. And it's not even just Boston hardcore. Um like I find it very fascinating what Al did. He really took what was happening in DC with straight edge, like very seriously. Like in like I think it's more than possible for straight edge to have not become this larger than life thing, almost like a network, and almost even like an intimidating force. Like, and not in like a militaristic way, but like in just like I just remember being young, and there were these like kind of anti-drug, healthy lifestyle living programs like Dare. That, I don't know if you ever heard of Dare.
Oh, yeah, they still do it.
Yeah,
They
they
did
still
when we
come to
were in middle
schools.
school.
They do?
They did
Yeah,
when we were in middle school. I don't know if they still do it, but
but
this is
at
this is
least a
like
few years ago.
5 years ago,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
they brought in like the police officers and did like whole thing.
Yeah. Like I think the intention there is good, but because I forgive me, but I just don't think I just it's not when you're young, and like it's really good to just kind of have the pressures of life, to keep a focused mind when you're young. It's such a positive thing to just have an out, like to not have to deal with the pressures. You When you're young, I remember just like really thinking like this whole straight edge thing, outside of like feeling like I have like a tribe. I remember just feeling like there's so much I don't have to deal with right now. I'm already bad at school. I have trouble connecting with people, like, and like the idea of like not having to worry about, like, getting drunk or high, and all the terrible things that can come with that. I was like, all right, I'm just not gonna have to worry about that right now. So I was like, this is cool. But I don't. It wasn't the Dare officers that made me think that was cool. So, but back to Al, and ultimately Boston hardcore, like the aesthetic of SSD, the kind of like varsity font of it, like this kind of like collegial look. Just if even if you look at the font of SSD, it's kind of like sporty. And I sucked at sports when I was a kid, but I liked them. It was like, I think that they're fascinating and they're fun to play. And I just remember seeing like, there was like this youth crew stuff in the in the mid to late 80s and in the late 90s again. And something looked like athletic about hardcore, especially like the youth crew straight edge stuff. And for me, as someone who liked sports but was so bad at them, and all the kids who were like really good at the sports, I just felt like I couldn't connect with them, and they didn't want me to connect with them because I wasn't good. I actually really liked seeing pictures of like Choke from Slapshot wearing like a Bruins jersey, and seeing like Al Baril's guitar having like Bruins gear all over, even though that was like a cardinal sin for like punk rockers, because punk rockers were like, you can't like sports, but then the jocks were like, you can't like punk rock. And there was something about just this punk rock, not jock, but like this punk rock athlete. It was giving the middle finger to all sides, including like the tribe trying to sell you a code. And I've really come to find, like, I could be wrong, but like I just there's a quotation from Al in some interview that he did, and people were like, don't you think it was like, totally uncool and uncalled for to be like in the punk scene and having like Bruins like stickers over your guitar? And he was like, I didn't care what anyone thought of me. And to me, that was like what punk rock was. And so there's like, you take Al out, I don't think you have this like whole wave, the youth crew stuff in 80 that begins with Youth to Today in 85 and flourishes still to this day. That's gone. All the Chain of Strength guys, I've been told directly, they were just ripping off Al Baril's style. And but then uh is the the idea of SSD as like a straight edge band kind of gives flow to this concept of like the concept of a straight edge band. I don't think Minor Threat was like a straight edge band. I think straight edge was just a song. But Al, I think, was the one who, in addition to like modern political history of the world and like the Holocaust, which is where I kind of like specialize. I also like have a background in like the history of Christianity. I know that, and there was this guy named Saint Paul. His name was Saul. He hated the early Christians. Allegedly, he was struck by lightning, and he had a vision of God, and then he came to be a believer in Jesus, and he went on to basically make Christianity what it was. Like he was traveling everywhere, making it go from this kind of like group of followers who liked this Jesus guy to like making it a movement. My argument is that Al Baril is the St. Paul of straight edge hardcore. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up like the varsity look, because I feel like, or also like counterfactuals, because I feel like I attribute the varsity look with like the youth crew stuff, but still that goes back to Al.
It does. I also think 7 Seconds and has Kevin Seconds is another like unbelievable founder. I mean, like, oh my God, like, not to get too caught up, but like,
Wasn't he doing like the paint under his eyes there?
yeah, he had a little sports thing too. So it's not on Al. There's a little bit on Kevin there too. But like the positivity, oh my God, like that's all Kevin Seconds. But some of the lyrics of SSD, man, they're like the lyrics, the boiling point are so they're bursting at the seams with emotion. It's about like, holding in uncontrollable tears and then just exploding. And those are some of the lyrics. And these are like hard dudes in a hardcore punk scene, and they're talking about crying. I just remember coming across those lyrics. And for me, in terms of the evolution of like the Boston hardcore scene, I don't know. I've always been someone who like reads the lyrics and just, if I can't connect with it on an emotional way, then it might just be something that's cool to me. or I'm unconnected with it all. But if I can connect with it on like a deeper emotional level, it's like glue, no pun intended. It is stuck to me, and I won't be able to get rid of it. And so, I in my rough view of history of Boston hardcore is, it's SSD and DYS and Jerry's Kids and the FUs and Gangrene, and all of that kind of fades in like by like 83 or 84. And then you have Slapshot coming back, like, in 85 to the second half of the 80s. And then you have like there's a dip, but there's a couple bands. There's uh Eye for an Eye and Only Living Witness in the early 90s. And then by 95, you have this kind of, you also have this other stuff that's happening. I think that Boston gets it can be overlooked in terms of the history of music, and especially in punk. You have everything. Granted, the Pixies were kind of Western Mass-ish, but like you 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 have like uh, in the late, I'm sorry, the early 90s. There's like a thriving, like kind of like, I would say maybe like kind of like 93, 94. You have bands like Piebald that are so influential, and Cave In and Converge, and like they're in the world of kind of hardcore. But then in 95 you have 10 Yard Fight, and they're kind of pushing back on like this kind of relatively like kind of like almost overly emotional scene that was happening around the Massachusetts scene. They kind of even it out, and then it became like, and then there was an explosion with bands like In My Eyes, and later on with like Right Brigade, and bands like Floor Punch in New Jersey that are kind of following suit in this kind of rebirth of straight edge hardcore, but it's Boston. But then, and 10 Yard Fight was rejecting against like kind of the overly emotional stuff, but then with like their straight edge youth crew stuff. And then American Nightmare pops up in 2000, 2001, and they're rejecting the cartoonish straight edge hardcore stuff. All the while you have Bane offering this incredibly emotional stuff. It's a whirlwind of like rejection, rejection, rejection. Bane is hovering over everything. The locking out scene rises up and like kind of knocks out the American Nightmare era. And then like, Havart was just kind of watching, or like really kind of saluting all of it at once. And so around like 2000, like 4 or 5, we kind of started catching on. And then I feel like we made a positive dent with our records. And then we quit. And then there was the rise of like bands like Free Spirit and Rival Mob, and they had their era was kind of again a return to like kind of regular hard, like kind of straightforward hardcore. And it's there's a really awesome variety at this point in time in the Boston hardcore scene. I'm real happy for that. And I gotta say though, like one of the things about that is that it's not easily achieved to have a variety of sonics, like of sound. There's always going to be people who say like, "Oh, that's not real hardcore," or "That's hardcore," or that's legit, that is no longer legit. A lot of gatekeepers and like trendsetters. And I think it kind of comes back to like what Al was saying, with people being like, "How dare you wear sports like logos on your guitar," and and also I'm like, I don't think my guess is that Al, I'd have to talk to him. He and I, talk back and forth now, but like, I wonder if he was accepted in the sports community, because because like something tells me that he wasn't, because so much of like sports culture that I left was like the ugliness of the locker room, and like just like boys being like just stereotypes of like this idea of being a boy. I hated it. So my guess is that Al was probably not as like this like straight edge sober living dude who was into punk rock. I don't think he was accepted much there. And SSD went on and did their own thing. They kind of changed their sound into something a little more classic rocky. And that's not my favorite stuff, but like they were still kind of like always doing what they wanted to do. And to me, that's always been kind of the essence of punk rock. And to me, that I feel like that's really the essence of like Boston hardcore. So like a band like Fiddlehead can play, we don't sound like in the traditional sound of hardcore, but play a show and it's with like never our record release was in Boston, back in October, and it was with like Never Ending Game, who sounds like, Crown of Thorns and Trapped Under Ice, and this band called Ankle Biter, and like these like hard bands, and my friend's band Down Talker, which is like this kind of like talking head sound, and it was just it was a hardcore show, and it felt uh it felt like a hardcore show, and but the sound was just it didn't sound like, the Kids Will Have Their Say or Wolfpack, but it felt like it. And to me, that's always kind of been what matters most, and that's always, I think, kind of what I've tried to make my dent in this scene, this Boston scene that I've been a part of, about 25 years, I guess, at this point. It's a long time.
You mentioned you were a high school history teacher, and it's kind of funny because the way you tell stories is even just about the Boston hardcore scene. It's almost like a historian is.
That's yeah. It's like you're like retelling events in an order, and you just make it like so easy to follow. So it was definitely a connection there.
Good. I'm glad. Are you guys like still in high school?
We're both juniors.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes. The interview I listened to the interview you guys did with John Brannon. How long ago was that? Was that a while ago?
This is our first interview we've done in like 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys were like in middle school.
We were either in freshman year or 8th grade.
Okay.
I don't know. We started it like about 4 years ago over the pandemic when
Okay.
we were
Cool.
like, now all these bands are not touring; they're all at home now.
Yeah.
let's catch them while they got nothing to do.
Very wise. Well, I teach mostly sophomores. I teach the AP World course, and
Gonna say.
did you take World History?
I
both-
loved
we
that
both took
class.
AP World last year.
Oh, you did? Okay, great, great, great. My students have the AP World exam next week, next Wednesday. So
Now it's AP US History. We have that test on Friday.
okay, that's right. I know it's on Friday.
It's the same in actually, yeah, I didn't know if it was like the AP schedule changes
Yeah.
by date or if it's
Yeah. Hey, you know what I'll do? I have this 200 plus Google Slides presentation that I give to my students. I think at this point, I bet you weren't expecting to get AP study tips during this interview, but I'll say what I say to my students. At this point in the game, you're not gonna remember or learn any more content, and the best thing to do is to just like really remember like the tips. I'm sorry, the way to prompt yourself on the writing section of the exam. If you really look closely at that rubric, this might be really boring for your listeners, and I'm sorry, but I find it fascinating. The
I'm
AP
gonna,
College
I'm gonna go
Board,
back to this like Friday morning.
Yeah.
I'll send it over. It's like it's been helpful, and I have students report back, and the College Board sends you all this data. It's like 98% of my students either get 4s or 5s, with most of them getting 5s. So I feel really good about that. However, like if you look closely at the LEQ and the DBQ rubric, it's like a weird game, and like they're almost asking you to write like a robot, and they even say that your essays are to be like looked at as first drafts. So like you should definitely like not try to be like this perfect writer on it, but your main goal should be to be clear and to just know what they want from you. That's
Yeah.
my
It's weird. It's like there's two different brains because like you write like that for the AP history classes, but then we're both also taking AP Lang. And it's
Yeah.
like you have to completely switch the modes of writer you are in between those exams. It's insane.
Yeah, you do, and that's okay. You switch one to the other, and it's about like knowing the rules, and then you can break them. And I don't love the College Board. Sometimes I worry that it's a little like why is your score out of 5? You ever think about that? My sneaking suspicion. And this is someone I don't hate the College Board. and I'm not like some like, you know, Marxist, like let's burn the system type of thinker about it. But like I think it can improve. But do you think everyone's gonna pay to take the test if everyone's doing well?
Well, I think I don't know if it was just Baltimore County or if it was all in Maryland, but the first AP test, or I'm pretty sure it's all of them now. They're free in
Oh,
Maryland.
they are.
They
Amazing.
they made them free for us, yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
That
Where
was the first year
Matt,
they've done that.
that's amazing. Well, in Massachusetts, so somebody's paying for that. The state is paying. They're getting money. The College Board ain't doing that for free
Yeah.
to the kindness of their hearts. That's the thing. They're actually not a board of colleges. I don't think any people know this about it. It's not a board of colleges. It's a group of like, people who have, quite frankly, a financial incentive for you to actually not do well. And so, like the reason why it's out of 5 is that you can get a bell curve very easily if it's out of 5. And if the test is yielding, like let's say you get, we know that there's not 100 questions on it. It's like 55 multiple choice, blah blah blah. But let's look, for the sake of clarity, let's just imagine it was 100 questions and you get 98 out of 100 correct. That's excellent. However, if a smaller group got 99 out of 100, that's not good for you. And if an even smaller group got 100 out of 100 and the majority of people got 98 out of 100, that means that you're average. You're getting a 3. Your score is based on how other people do. And that's weird. That's not about learning. That's about like kind of deciding who's superior, who's average,
Yeah.
and that's the stuff I don't really
The
like.
curb system has always bothered me with like every time I've taken those tests, which is why I kind of always take them with a grain of salt. Because like we're also both in the AP music theory class at our school, and it's like a
Which
lot
is
of
the bane
kids.
of my existence.
Yeah, and a lot of kids that take that class are like very niche wanting to go into like classical study. And like that's perfectly fine, but I know that I'm not trying to do that. And so it's like the second that they get those like say they get like 80s and I get like a 70, then all of a sudden I go down the drain even though that's not a poor score. Like it's such a weird system.
Music theory is not for fans of music.
Yeah.
Probably not. I just the thing I worry about and I try to relay to my students is like you really can't put much stock in whatever score you get. For one, like there's a lot of socioeconomic inequality in the country, and what we know about how well students perform is sometimes it's like it has a lot to do with access to like tutors, the socioeconomic status of their background, and not to take away from like really working hard and despite whatever challenge you're in, it doesn't seem like a really perfect system to really evaluate a student's aptitude. um, but it's not imperfect, and I think it does have a value to it. But I just don't think it's like it's rules for like I don't think it should make you feel like go on like an ego trip and think you're like, oh my god, I'm the greatest. Like it might be the case that you're in a really great school system, and you're dealing with a lot of inequality in the country and the sample of students that are taking it. But also it's also not a reason to like feel bad about yourself. You have to understand there's a game going against you. And but to segue and link this back to like what we're here for, I I I relay that stuff to my students, not because of like some hidden Marxist, anti-capitalist agenda or anything like that. I think it's because of really the values I've learned about like from just being in like the world of punk, and not that I like it's my idiot punk is my ideology. I've just sort of like growing up in that world, and especially in the Boston hardcore scene, the lessons I've learned, the way I've kind of seen the world is to say like, and this is like almost a direct line from this band Eye for an Eye, like it a lot of people tend to view the world as it is and think that that's just how it should be, and not how and don't think about the ways in which it could be. And however corny that might sound, It's that to me is like kind of like what the implicit message of like just punk music is just sort of like, is to just flip the coin and always find, some type of better way, not in some like progressivism ideology, but just sort of say like, if things aren't working, be more creative, be more imaginative, and flip the coin. And that's been something that I apply to every facet in my life, whether it be in, being a parent, and I'm dealing with like my 5 and 2 year old, and I'm like, I don't seem to be really getting through to this 2 year old who will not put on her pajamas. I should probably, rather than getting upset about it, I should probably think about, well, how can I reassess, or my marriage or my friendships. Um, I think it's really valuable, but it's I I do think it is a fixture of the Boston hardcore scene, because like it's kind of always changing. It's I think for the last few years it's been kind of it's been hard to keep in touch as a new parent, but like I just, at least with Fiddlehead, like it's just been a total embrace of a band that doesn't really match the typical sound, and I just appreciate that. And you know, I I'm happy with the big, to really circle back to your original question, Dom. I'm really happy with that evolution of Boston.
Yeah.
It's just it's cool, and it's a little gruff. It's still all the cool things of its past are totally still there. You have a band like Colin of Arabia that is
Oh, I saw
scary.
them back in February.
Yeah, that they're, Colin is in a very intimidating guy, and I can imagine that being around him was probably what it was like, being around like Choke or Al back in like 1980, when it was like, the world of punk is a very like it tends to be a lot of maladjusted people, and I don't know, I like, there's a tolerance for the maladjusted in the world, and in that punk world, and I like it.
Yeah, it makes me think about how makes me think about all these other like, you know, punk rock people that became teachers, like Jay from Mind Force, Greg Graffin, and how Nancy Burrill will post a lot on Instagram about, kids she finds at her school that are in a music and stuff. Do you ever have experiences like that?
Like experiences where like, say it again, sorry.
But maybe like finding people at your school that
Oh
are
yeah.
also into hardcore, and maybe geek out about like
Oh, big
maybe
time.
go into the class not knowing like my teacher was in Have Heart.
Oh, oh well, in terms of like other people at my school, I actually kind of work at like a very cool punk school. So I, I, uh, my old band, Sweet Jesus, we played a show with this band Into Another, which had Drew from Bold, the drummer of Bold, who I worshipped, whose record cover, a poster for their album Speak Out I had on my wall growing up, and he's like shirtless on like the bottom right corner, and like this matters for the story. But I I was going to see Into Another. The legend Drew is playing drums in Into Another. Richie from Underdog sings for Into Another. Um, and I'm there, and I see my coworker, uh, Krista, walk in, and I was like, I had been at the school for like maybe 2 years at that point in time, and I was like, I'm in like my like tribal zone. I don't think I'm going to see any of my colleagues. And in comes Krista, and I was like, what are you doing here? She's like, oh, my brother drums for Into Another. And I was like, your brother's Drew? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, as in Drew Beat from Bold? And she was like, yeah. I was like, I grew up looking at him shirtless on my wall for like my entire life. And she was like, yeah, that's weird. So I was like, my mind was blown, and like I just decided to like just like punish her with questions. I was like, so did you like know like the original Youth Crew? And she was like, yeah, there used to be like, they would call them like Youth Crew sleepovers. I was like, Youth Crew sleepovers. And she was
Those
like,
are
yeah, I would
usually
like,
slumber parties, not sleepovers.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was like, tell me about these Youth Crew sleepovers. She's like, yeah, like Ray and like Porcel, they would come over and like we just like watch like like horror movies. And I was like, and she's like, they used to call me Muffin because I would like bake them muffins and stuff like that. And I was like, my mind was just like blown because I was just obsessed with it. But the singer of Mental, his wife actually helped me get my job at the school like about 11 years ago. She didn't like, I mean, she told me that there was a position opening and she maybe put in a good word. Uh, the bassist of Waste Management, Danimal, he's a physics teacher at my school. There's some cool like cool punk stuff there.
Do your
But
students acknowledge that?
yeah, yeah, they do. I'm not like secretive about it, but um, I'm also like I would rather die than attempt to like try and be cool with young people. Um, it just it just never works. I remember a couple really well-intending teachers of mine when I was in high school, like trying to make a connection and but not in like a sincere way. Like they were just like trying to be like young, and I was like, hey, there's nothing wrong with not being a teenager. Like you're not a teenager.
Yeah.
You're in your mid to late 20s. So, just be yourself. And like then I was like, this can't be pleasant for anybody. Like I'm unpleasant thinking I got to tell this adult to just be themselves. And I'm sure it's not fun being an adult hearing a kid kids say just be yourself. Uh, so like I tend to avoided that. So in other words, like I don't like I don't like try and use like cool singer points to connect with kids. However, like Have Heart has I was in with Fiddlehead now. I've been able to really travel the world 2 or 3 times over. Like and I teach world history and kind of coming back to world history. Um, I explain to them. I will use my experience like while touring and the anecdotal experience to kind of like add to uh, just to add to like an understanding of the way of the world. One of the examples that's a story I kind of tell a lot is when I'm trying to teach students the concept of like a nation and what it means to be a part of like a member of a nation state as opposed to like an empire state. So like that really kind of shows itself a little bit in the American Revolution, but definitely in the French Revolution. And in my reading of the history, you know, the there was the first estate and the second estate, and then there was the third estate, which was like everyone else. But from my reading of the documents and just my knowledge of the history, the first estate and the second estate, which were like the nobility and the priests, like they didn't really view the third estate as like French people. They just viewed them as like people who spoke French. And that's like a really upsetting like concept when you think about it. And but if you're thinking about it in like terms of like 1789 and it's like the year 2024, it's like difficult to be like to make that temporal leap. And so I'll use an example that it is real life and from my own, and I'll say like the example I give is when Have Heart was in we went to Russia. Our route to Russia was amazing. So like we played 2 shows in Finland, and we flew into Helsinki. But the first of the 2 shows in Finland was like about 7 hours away from Helsinki on the Russian border. Now the second show in Finland was in Helsinki. So we flew into Helsinki, drove 8 hours, and then we drove 8 hours back to Helsinki. And then the third show was in St. Petersburg. So then we drove that same route back through Finland, another 8 hours. So that was 24 hours of driving back and forth. Anyway, so it's like 2 a.m. This is all context to just kind of like explain my mind and why I ended up having the conversation I did with this Russian kid that really changed my outlook on human society. So like It's we're in Helsinki. It's like 3 a.m. This like strange Russian guy in a car picks us up. He doesn't speak the same language as the Finnish kids. They're kind of struggling with the language. And they were like, "Yeah, this guy is driving you to St. Petersburg." We were like, "We don't know who he is. It's not like a van, it's like a car." And they're like, "Yeah, this is what the kids from Russia got for you as your transportation." We were like, "We don't know who the hell this guy is. He's not like a hardcore kid bringing us to the next place." And because usually if we didn't have a driver, there would be like a hardcore kid driving us. But we were like, 3 a.m. Helsinki, why not get in a car with a strange Russian man? And so we did, and it was very crunched up. We made that 8 hour trip for a third time all the way to St. Petersburg. We go through the border. We play the show in St. Petersburg. It's totally stacked. It's one of the best shows Have ever played. And the venue is like, we played on a stage that was like a hole in a wall, and there was no door to a backstage from the stage. So we were just like trapped on stage. We finished our set. They're demanding that we play more. So we do an encore. We play another song. Like they asked for another song. So we play one other song. They asked for a third encore, and we're like, we don't have any more songs, but they're still demanding it. So we're like, all right, we'll play a song that we already played twice. So we played that, and I was so exhausted because I hadn't been sleeping because we were going back and forth, back and forth. And so then they're like, play like a fourth encore. And like we literally couldn't get off the stage. So I had been drinking so much water, I was so exhausted. I ended up just completely vomiting all over the stage, and I passed out. And then they left. So they literally, the Russians played me till I couldn't move anymore. And then like someone was like, you got to get up because we got to make the train to Moscow, and it's about a mile away. We got to carry all the merch and the gear over. So I'm like dead tired. We get to this old Russian Soviet era train that had not been updated, honestly, since like the collapse. Like honestly, there were like murals of like Lenin in the train. It was like this old train. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I'm like out of my mind. So like, of course, I'm last to the train. And I get on, and it's like has like these like overnight compartments with like 4 beds in each. And my 4 bandmates all have their own cozy compartment together. And then the only compartment that I was left in there was like 3 strange Russian men, and then a bed for me. And I go in my compartment. I'm just dying to fall asleep. And it's just like these 3 guys like staring at me as if like they were upset with how the Cold War went. And so I was like, all right, I think I'm just gonna take a look at this train. There was like a breakfast area, and I just sort of stayed there, and I had this beautiful sunrise experience. I'm totally exhausted, and I just decided, like, really, I'm probably never going to be in Russia again. Let's just see what this looks like. And as the sun's rising, I'm seeing like a really impoverished landscape. I'm just seeing like, there's no like finished buildings. I'm seeing a lot of like just like junkyards. It really like it was just like a sign of like kind of like a real brokenness, and that was nothing like what I saw in St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg was like unbelievably beautiful. It was like this like futuristic looking city that like really preserved its past, and like it just felt so like like architecturally advanced, but also just up like it felt like progress. It looked like the mark of progress. Meanwhile, I'm looking through everything in between St. Petersburg en route to Moscow, and as we get a little bit closer to Moscow, the images of profound poverty start to kind of dissipate, and we get to Moscow, and I'm in like this other like kind of like really like futuristic, like awesome looking 21st century city, and we meet with the kids, and I asked one of them, and I was like, hey, can you tell me like what is between St. Petersburg and Moscow? Like what do you make of that culture? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Oh, that's not really Russia. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, those people, they're not really Russian. They're the Russian people, real Russian people. They live in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And I couldn't believe what he was saying to me because at this point, I had driven, I'm from Massachusetts, and the wealth in the United States has just been like if you there's a great map that you can look at, like the history of wealth in the United States, and it's been like sucked up in the Northeast for a long time. Like, so I'm from this like coastal state, and like I'm used to like really like quaint looking New England. Like, Boston is such a beautiful looking city. We have all these wonderful educational institutions. But I've driven through the country, and I've driven through my state. There are parts of my state that are really suffering, that don't add up to the stereotype of like, of wealth and high society of New England. I've seen where my father grew up in the projects of Boston. I've seen poverty, and I've seen poverty throughout the country. At that point, definitely driving through the country and just seeing, we were around like I remember, I'll never forget it. We missed Hurricane Katrina by like a day, and we were touring through it, and then like, we had heard like, oh, there's a storm, in Louisiana, and like, and then the next year we drove through Louisiana, we saw just how and then like 3 years later we saw how still struggling it was. I remember, I've driven through like pockets of Detroit that like look like have a war zone has gone through it. And never once have I ever thought that that was not America, or that the people there were not Americans. And here was this kid telling me that like those people aren't a part of our country, and that the real people of our country are where the wealth is. And like that to me is how you can understand what it might be like to live in a country that has not fully really developed itself to understand itself as a nation state. As a nation state is when the state is to serve the people, not the people serving the state. And when you have ideas and attitudes of people in like the wealthy cities of a country looking at the people who are in the impoverished ones, that strikes to me as a country, or at least a mindset of like, of not nationhood, of not this idea of living in a nation state, and is far more reflective of what it would be like to be like, an impoverished like farmer, suffering, like living on the whims of the environment, in 18th century France. This idea that like you're not one of us. And so when the French Revolution came in, and you had these revolutionaries going to these, like going up to these impoverished peasants and the city people saying, you know what, no, you know what, this is revolution for you. You are a part of this. You are France. It like that. I think that the anecdotes that I can pull from my time in seeing the world, I have tons of them. That's when I'll use that stuff. And so, if in the process they're thinking along the way, hey, Mr. Flynn, he's kind of cool. He's traveled. Then job done, because I at no point was like trying to be cool. I was trying to just sort of explain my experience.
Yeah, have there been kids where like they don't really care about like the bands you play in, but then maybe throughout the year they come in and they're like, Fiddlehead's not bad.
Yeah. That's happened. Like, I mean, like, I gotta say, like to be as informed on the music that you guys are talking about is at such a young age. It's I was the same way when I was in middle school. Like I was just like a weirdo student. I mean, I wish I could have gone to like if like Harvard or Yale or Oxford offered like a like a degree in like punk hardcore history in the eighth grade. I could gotten graduated with honors on that. But so like I salute you, and to me it's not weird, but it is rare that people at such a young age find this subculture interesting. Like, 'cause I think that there's a lot of good arguments as to why punk and hardcore are like on the surface level are not interesting. Like on the surface level, it's like just moshing and like loud music. No one knows what they're saying. Uh, honestly, like, one thing I kind of find fascinating is that more and more just general kids uh, look like punk and hardcore, like traditional punk and hardcore kids. I remember I was a total weirdo because I wore Vans. I wore like old school Vans. Like no one wore those, and like the prom queen wears old school Vans now. Like like the coolest kids in school wear it, and like that's cool. But my point is like I don't. My presumption is that the vast majority of my students could not care less about me being into like punk rock. I'm still waiting for like to see like like turnstile shirts at my school. I haven't yet, but I'm always looking just to see like
Yeah.
I had a couple kids aware and talking about them, but I'm waiting for like a sea of turnstile shirts to be like the cool thing.
It's funny you said there's a lot of stuff that's not appealing about the hardcore scene, because that's the stuff that like is super appealing to some people. Like I was watching I had a little bit of downtime in class the other day, and I was writing some questions for this, and I was watching the last Have Heart show on my phone from 2009.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody, I'm watching people like walk on each other's heads and stuff, and I'm like, this is awesome. And somebody looks over my shoulder and goes, "No, if somebody did that to me, I'd be mad as hell." And just walked by.
Yeah, yeah. That's about right. And you know what? I stand. Whoever said that, I stand with them. I would be mad as hell if someone walked on my head. But in the context of a show, it's all kind of if they're doing it, in the with the intention of the electricity of the show, and they're doing it in a way that is not intended to break my skull. I'm all for it. But yeah, there's a lot to be turned off just from like a 100-foot view, and also like quite frankly, once you really get into it, this is also a lot to be turned off by. It's not a utopia in any way, shape, or form. But for me, like I kind of come back to just the idea of like flipping the coin. If something's like if something seems kind of, I don't know, broken, then you fix it, and if it can work better, then you improve it. That tends to be my take to it all.
Yeah, and kind of on the high school topic, my favorite Fiddlehead song is Down University, where the chorus is no one cares, it's just a name, you are more than a degree. Were you kind of nervous writing that as a high school teacher? Just about
No,
maybe how it would be perceived?
yeah, no, I not at all. No, I'm pretty fearless with that. Um, the school I work at a school that it's had it's a wonderful school. I'm so lucky to be there. It's a public school. But it's had its ups and downs with over over stressed students, and over stress is what I just call anxiety. And anxiety is stress is natural. It's good to have stress. It's a response to a challenge, and oftentimes like when we're having a cognitive challenge, we're also like making new meaning, and that can be stressful. But when you're overstressed, you're in the realm of anxiety, and that's really when you start kind of like making decisions based on fear of something that is really not plausible. And kind of coming back to like the AP like college board and how it can like get people to really think that the essence of their whole identity is based on a number 1 through 5. Like that's a real sad way to live. I was I was super lucky to like my I'm the youngest of three. My father he didn't grow up with a lot of money, and education was his way out, and he he got he got into like a bunch of like ritzy like Ivy League schools, um, but he couldn't really take the chance to like you know to go and then potentially fail out and then owe money. So he got into the United States Military Academy, as which was really difficult to get into. There's a physical fitness test to it. There's the academics, and um, I don't think he was like gung ho on joining the military, but it was a free education as the government would pay for it. And so he went, and it was a prestigious school, and he kind of entered into a world of relative quote unquote prestige. Um, and with my older brother, I think because my father had come from, a place where education was the way out. I think my father definitely kind of like worked my brother a little bit too hard. And I could kind of see that taking its toll on my brother. My father like readjusted and was a little bit lighter with my sister. By the time it came to me, like I knew nothing about the politics of like higher education. Um, and I'm so grateful for that. Like I I knew that like Harvard was a good school, and that my uncle Doug went to MIT when he was 15, and like and that MIT was like a big deal. But I didn't have this like obsessive compulsive disorder about like what school I was going to get into. I wasn't a very good high school student because I was so jilted with with school and like with a lot of just like kind of like stuff at home and whatnot. And so like, but I didn't have this like earth shattering pressure to like get into this like top tier school. And I'm so grateful that like my my parents like kind of protected me from that, because I just was like I had a wonderful middle school like history education, which was so meaningful to me because when I was in kindergarten and first grade, you guys are in Maryland, right?
Yeah.
My father worked at the Pentagon. He was like a Colin Powell speechwriter and a debriefer, and like from 1990 to 1992. So I lived in Columbia, Maryland for 2 years, and there was some new like learning program, and I actually didn't learn how to read in the first grade. But I was the youngest, and my father was retired. We're getting back to ready to move back to Massachusetts, and I didn't know how to read. And so when I got to school in the second grade, I stood out, and on the first day of second grade, my teacher had asked me to read in front of the class, not even asking me if I knew how to read. It was just like the protocol for the first day, and I was the new kid. And I'll never forget how awful I felt. I was like on the outskirts of like the learning experience. But like I had like the it was a small Catholic school. I had this nun teach me every day at recess how to read, and I went on to win the spelling bees at my school. But then I got to middle school and had Mr. Hall, the same history teacher for 3 years, and I completely fell in love with history. And it felt like it was something that you do, wasn't something that you memorize. It's about storytelling, but it's also about like criticizing the story, coming up with your own story. I loved it. I was so involved. And then I got to high school and it was just like lecture, lecture, lecture. And I like fell out of love with the one thing that I felt like I was good at doing, because history was something that you do and not just sort of memorize. And that's like really why I got super into punk rock, because it was like the only other thing that I felt like I had control over. So I wasn't a very good high school student because I was just struggling there. But I'm so glad that I wasn't like if I had thought like, oh, if I go to a school that's not like an Ivy League school, I might as well just like, disappear and fade away and die or something like that, because but there are kids at my school. There's a contingent of kids who really who feel that way. And there's really reasonable explanations for that. I have a lot of students who are first generation. Their parents are, like are immigrants, and like they really see like in the way that my grandparents were like, teaching my father, you have to work hard. And so like, you do got to work hard, and education is the vehicle. It's the best vehicle in social mobility, in my opinion. But you got to be careful about that line. And, you know, that if you cross it, you cross into this zone that you simply are like a number and you are the college sweatshirt that you wear and that's your identity. And I just, like, I see it destroy kids. And my father, he passed away like very unexpectedly when I was 24. And that was when I started learning about all his like accomplishments and like, and really like his funeral was at West Point and I got to see where he was at for 4 years. I saw the discipline of like of the cadets there. And I just got to know the history and my mind started like really trying to like connect with my father's like story. And something happened with me. I started like obsessing over like where I should, because I wanted where I wanted to go for graduate school, and I became nuts. I applied to like every top tier school. I got into Brown University, which is why it's called Down University. I had a very bad go at Brown University. Um, that's something for another podcast that I don't want to get sued for. But I just want to say on the record, I think Brown University's teacher education program not great. I don't think they're I don't think they're actually really interested in helping. But I got into uh, I actually didn't know that Columbia was like an Ivy League school. I was watching that show Gossip Girl with my girlfriend, who's now my wife at the time, and they go to Columbia. And I thought it was a fictional school, and I was like, Columbia, oh, my friend Aaron, he goes there. Is that a real school? And my wife looks at me, she's like, yeah, it's like an Ivy League, it's like a prestigious school, like it's one of the like the best schools. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. I guess I'll apply there too. And so I kind of laugh. I'm so glad I didn't really know that, but I think in like a weird element of grief, I was trying to like impress my father in his absence. And I kind of lost myself for a bit. You know, like I wasn't having the best of time at Brown, and I ended up like I deferred to Columbia and to Boston College, and so I was doing a dual degree, a history degree and an ed degree at Brown, and the ed stuff wasn't really great. And I feel like it wasn't actually preparing me to be a good teacher. So um, I had to kind of flip the coin and say, like, you know what? I don't think that this is me that's doing well. I actually think it's this. I think it's this like elite Ivy League school that's not doing a very good job here. And like, like in that, like what had happened was like the spell of prestige and status like dominated. And I started really thinking poorly about myself. Well, like, well, I'm at this like really like this Ivy League school and I'm struggling here, then it really must be me. And I had to like step back, and I ended up talking to one of my father's childhood friends. I called him up. He was like a principal in Boston, and I was like, "Hey, I'm not really having a good time here." And he was like, "Well, walk me through, describe it to me." And he helped me really realize. He's like, "You know, Patty, like, you know, your father would tell you like just because it's an Ivy League school doesn't mean anything." And you know, my father was very reverent towards West Point, and I learned this story about my father. My father ended up teaching at West Point before I was born, and there was like a hazing incident that my father called out, and you know, he brought it up to like you know the powers that be. He said, "Hey, there's a student of mine who's being hazed, and it needs to stop." And nothing changed. And so my father went above that chain of command, and that was a real no-no. Uh, and the next thing he knew, according to my mother, a helicopter flew in on the campus of West Point, picked him up, and brought him to Washington because there was an incident of like you know going against the code of West Point, which is the United States Army's training ground. Like it's a military academy, and so like they can't have these incidents of like mistreatment. And so there my father was. He was like this poor kid in Boston, but he's in this beautiful campus in New York at West Point teaching like philosophy and English to like cadets. It's like the life that a poor kid from Boston could have never dreamed of. Next thing he knows, he's sent to like become like a recruiting officer in like New Haven, Connecticut, which is like a, you know, basically like a storage closet of like placement in like careers in the army. And I remember hearing that story because I had worked myself up into thinking like, oh, my father went to West Point, this wonderful place. It's like, only the best go there. And I was like trying so hard to prove myself. And there I was at Brown thinking like, woe is me. I must just not be cut out for this. I'm not like my father. And then I hear this story that my father himself was like, you know what? Like, screw West Point. They're not living up to their own morals of honor. Like and and so he went against this like cushy life at West Point, and because he felt like something was wrong, and he was critical of that too, and he still revered it and whatnot. And that really kind of helped me kind of turn my mind against this idea that, you know what, maybe just because something is of a high status and has this prestige, which by the way means illusion. The word prestige means illusion, i.e., not real. So all these Ivy League schools, they have this like like this prestige and this illusion of greatness. And then I went in, and I remember my classmates. I had like what you call imposter syndrome. I was like, I think I got in here by accident, and schools don't actually know like the loser punk rocker that I am. It was like a bad way to think about oneself. I was lost in this like orb of like obsession over status, and I ended up just like, I remember listening to my classmates, and I remember we had like one of our first seminars, and I remember expecting them to say these like incredibly profound like ideas and using words that I wouldn't even know about because I was just this kind of lower middle class kid. And I remember hearing them and just like not being impressed. Just like, just like kind of like being like, this is pretty average. And then like coming to find out that a lot of the kids who were there as like undergrads, and they had connections, and they went to like really good high schools, and they had tutors, and like, and that's fine and great. And I just sort of started to see the game and how it all kind of worked. And so I ended up leaving Brown, and I like split up my two degrees. I did my like teacher stuff at BC, and I did my history stuff at Columbia over the summers while I was teaching and living in New York in my car, by the way. I would I would like sublet my apartment and like drive to New York and stay there like Monday through Thursday. And if my friends who lived in New York couldn't put me up, I would sleep in my fucking car. And like the street like cleaners would be like, "Hey, you're working really hard." And I was like, "I guess I am." I didn't really realize that like I was effectively like living on the streets, but not in like a real way. But anyway, um, the program at Columbia, the programs at BC, they were great. But I remember really thinking completely got lost in this thing. And I'm so glad that my parents protected me from it when I was a teenager, because when you're young, it's just that much more difficult to make sense of the world. And that's why I wrote that song, because I had students before me. I had this one student who was like obsessed with getting into Oxford University, obsessed with it, and I couldn't believe, and she was just such an unbelievably awesome student, a profound thinker. And she'd come back, like her junior year, and be like, "This is the plan," and like she ended up not getting in, and she was fine, and she felt fine. She's at the London School of Economics, and like it's just a nice school, but she doesn't care that she's at the London School of Economics. She ended up choosing London School of Economics over a bunch of really wonderful schools because they were known for specializing in the type of history that she wanted to study. And so like like, and she actually was one of the students who like really loved that song too when it came out. And that was like the intended goal. We don't actually play it that much, like at all.
I noticed that. I
Uh,
saw. I feel like one of the last times you guys played it was, at least just from what I've seen, was in Indonesia.
Yeah. How do you know that? Is it the last FM, the Discogs thing?
Wait, what about Last FM?
Is that the thing that shows like playlists of bands?
I don't
I
know.
don't.
I just found out because this was on. I saw it on YouTube.
Okay.
Watching a bunch of like
Yeah.
different Fiddlehead videos. I haven't seen you guys.
Well, you're doing your research good. I see a career in journalism or history, blossoming there. But yeah, that is the last time that we played it. Our deal with that song is like it's funny because it really has been a song that like if people kind of come up to us at the shows, they're like, this song means so much for me, and from like any age group, high school to like full on adults. Um, but I don't like it. It doesn't like when we play it, people like it, but it's a very like it. I worry that sometimes it comes off as like a PSA, like a public service announcement,
Is
and
is that why Have Heart never played Song of Shame that much either? Was that the same sort of thing?
you know your stuff. Yeah, we don't play Song of Shame that much. It's funny. That song almost has kind of PSA stuff too. I look back on that song. Uh, I don't like that it's called Song of Shame. Because I don't like that idea about like straight edge being like a source that people should condemn shame, and that's not what I was doing. The song is about a close person in my life who just who like substances got the best of them, and so it wasn't like they should be ashamed. It's that it is a shame. That's the thinking, and I often got worried that people would have interpreted it as this kind of like holier or better than thou type of approach to straight edge that I totally loathed. I hated this idea. Like I hated the idea that like if you broke edge, like you couldn't be straight edge again.
Kill
I,
anyone with a beer in their hand.
yeah, oh, I mean, listen, I come from the Boston scene. That's the straight edge can, but that's the song's a joke. That's the
Wait.
But sometimes people sometimes don't understand the punchline. They don't see the punchline, and so when Havar was starting, just to digress a little bit, there was like a serious militant straight edge problem, and I hated that. I was like, why would something so awesome and valuable for young people who are yearning for a feeling of like social connection and belonging, and also could benefit from just sort of like at least like their adolescent years not being caught up with like addiction, like seeing a young person addicted has to be one of the most heartbreaking things. It's just like it's really anybody addicted, but when you're young and you're addicted, and that's really kind of what that song was about. So the other one of the reason why I'm not like this, I don't think I've ever mentioned this publicly, but when the opening line is like, let me tell you a story about a backfired rocket ship, because it was about a friend who just truly was like, they were going for the stars and then they just got lost in substance abuse. And it was like a serious song for me, but my bandmates, when we got the record, this is an old story. When we got the record, the first mix, they're like, "Did you say vampire rocket ship?" And I was like, "Vampire rocket? What are you talking about?" And they're like, "Yeah, did you say vampire rocket ship?" And I was like, "What do you think?" They were like, "Oh, it sounds like you're saying vampire rocket ship." And so like it became like a joke. They would like draw like vampires on rocket ships. And I got to tell you, like it killed the song for me. And so like and on top of the other thing, if I didn't want it to feel like this kind of like better than now, that's the reason why we don't play it that much. But with Down University, like I think we try to reserve it for a special occasion. So Indonesia, everyone has to play a hardcore show there in their life at least once. It's just like the best. Jakarta has the best scene on the planet, in my humble opinion. It was years ago in 2009 when Havard went there, and it was even crazier this time around. And so like we felt like we would bust that one out, and I guess the kids would be receptive to it. It's a little bit about reception, but we're doing a like Fiddlehead's doing a full-ish tour
Yeah.
this summer, and we're coming through Maryland, so we'll we'll play it. On that, because it's a longer tour. We tend to like we have Fiddleheads oddly has like a lot of songs now. Um, we rotate the set pretty much every night.
I
We'll do
I got tickets to that show in Baltimore. The place is a little unconventional. Have you heard anything about Zika Farm in Baltimore?
I did some. Let me ask you this: did something happen? Is it no longer there? Did it get moved to the auto bar by any chance? I
Uh,
don't think
I haven't heard anything about that, but I was just at Zika Farm like for the
that's
first
what I heard.
time 2 weeks ago. Um,
I'm got it pulled up right here because I saw something the other day that made me go, wait a minute, I thought it was at this like farm
like a
thing.
skate park.
You're right. It's at the farm thing. I was looking at an old flyer.
Um, but I just went there for the first time like 2 weeks ago, and it's under a highway. Um,
Okay.
which to start is, you know, and you walk up and immediately it feels like an amusement park. I went there to go see this band called Jive Bomb play.
Oh yeah, I know.
And on one side there's like all these skateboarders, and there's like crowds around the skateboarders watching them like, skate the bowls and stuff. And then on the other side, um there's all these like different stands of people like making food. There's somebody like set up on a ramp making like brick oven pizzas.
Oh, it's great.
And then right towards the middle is all these hardcore bands playing. And
Yeah.
it like there's just so many people doing their own thing. It's a pretty cool space.
I think that that's how it should be. I just like the idea of like uh music, people,
Yeah.
and like it's why I cannot stand the barrier, especially in the context of like a hardcore show. Like I just it to me like you can't do a barrier. You just can't do a barrier.
Yeah,
You can be a hardcore band and play a show with a barrier, but you make no mistake, in my opinion, that ain't a hardcore show. That's just a concert, and like the specialty uh is lost. And with that have our reunion show that we did outside years ago, the last time we did that reunion, we had
yeah,
like
the Palladium, right?
yeah, it was the outdoor Palladium show, and it was like just about 10,000 people. It was like 9,900 and like
99.
something like tickets or something like that. And my mother said that she bought like enough tickets just to put it over 10. But the we had to spend a pretty penny to get it so that there was no barrier. And most people would be like, why would you spend that much money to make sure that there's no barrier? Just do the no barrier. We were like, it won't exist. It won't happen. Like, you could have bought a car with the money that we spent to have no barrier, like more than that, if you will. Uh, but it was that important for us, because that to me it's like that's the whole specialty. I've only really ever seen um like I went to a real jazz club, like a jazz show one time, like over 10 years ago. And I went a couple times, but I've never gone back because like I just was like, this is this is a world I like. It's gonna be work for me to really understand it. Like, because there's such a code, but and I sense it the second I got in there. There is a social contract and unwritten code going on here, that there's a synergy, and the band is with the audience, and it's just the magic. It's so much more magical than just listening to the jazz pieces at home. It feels like a movie. I went to one of my students plays in the Boston Youth Orchestra, and I went to it's a very competitive, like, a youth orchestra in Boston. Uh, this guy Xander is like the conductor, and I finally went to one of her shows, and she played just last Friday, and it's now the only other time, in addition to jazz and hardcore, where I seen, and it's very different. It's not like the crowd was like, amped up with like the hundreds of violins and a harp or anything like that, but there was an electricity between the audience and the conductor and the players, and that electricity was felt in the silence. The audience knew we're not clapping, and I didn't know that, and I wasn't like clap. I wasn't disrupting it, but like that's what I mean by the electricity. It was like there's something in the air that is really indescribable, and there's nothing better than when like there's a punk show that just has that. And that was really what Havart and both Fiddlehead have always kind of like really gone for. And it's hard because like it's very easy to fall into the cosplay and like the LARPing element of it. And for me, it's always been about like I'm like I'm a little like obsessive about my lyrics, because like I want them to be really cathartic for myself, and the catharsis actually tends to happen when I'm writing it. And like there's a song on the new Fiddlehead record called Queen of Limerick. It's a very very heavy song, and I remember doing practice demos in my garage, and just like feeling myself in terms of practicing it, getting the lyrics out, like really feeling myself like kind of walk through like a real meaningful like moment in my life, and kind of like you might find in like a in a really meaningful conversation with a friend, or even like a therapist. You kind of like something has been unearthed. And for me, if I can have that in the writing session of it, it might be possible, to kind of trip along that with other songs I've written myself, or it's possible that other people might connect in that way. And so I really think it's true. I was listening to your interview with Ian, and he said this before, like the idea that like you don't tour to support the record, you write the record to support the tour and to support the show, because that's like, oh my God, that's where the magic happens, and it's really hard to pull off, because I think in order to do that, you got to be presenting art that is as genuine as you can, and you gotta encounter like people who can recognize that, and that's rare, but when it happens, oh man, it's so great. But it also, for me, like it's a reason to not tour so much, because you find yourself like chasing this magical moment, and like it's hard to have happen time and time again, but when it's there, it's so wonderful, it's so great. And I'm real grateful to have, like, to all the people we've encountered, and like just through like Havard and Fiddlehead shows. They've been wonderful. It's a gift in my life. Super grateful for it, and it is worth it, and it's all positive stuff. It's I don't know, I think everyone should give music a try.
It's funny you brought up like how barricades can like affect your experience at a show. I went to the fest in Gainesville, Florida, this past October, and if there wasn't a barricade at this one show, probably would have been the best show I've ever been to. I didn't go to like the entire thing. I just went to one show where it was like the Gorilla Biscuits, Dillinger 4, Less Than Jake, and All, which is like a crazy mixed lineup, but like
Awesome. That's
I
a great.
what four bands like I can't even put it into words how much those four bands mean to me. And Civ was like, why is like a pit of photographers more important than like jumping off the stage? You know?
Yeah, I've heard that about Civ. I heard recently, a friend of his was asking about Havar doing a show, and I said like, well, Havar doesn't really play that. We're not back. We're not back. Um, like we're only we didn't play for 10 years. We were broken up, and there's a lot of reasons as to why, but like we felt like we wanted to, and this time around we felt like we had a positive time last time, but we also really like what is happening in hardcore and punk right now. We like the energy and the feel of the people, and we would like to play a show with those people. And that's kind of the reason why we're doing it. But like we have no intention of sticking around. But this guy was asking us to like, hey, now that you're playing shows, you want to play another show? And we're like, it's not how it works. But even if we were to start talking, like we have like a no barrier rule, and he's like, well, we want this to be like a huge, huge, huge thing, so we'd have to have a barrier. And I was like, well, then you have to accept the fact that we're not playing. So, and he's like, we're talking,
This is Civ saying this?
no, it's not Sif. No, this is like a go between. The really wonderful guy. He's like, we want to do like a really, really big thing. This is down the lines, and like I was like, well, that's just a deal breaker. And he was telling me, he's like, you're just like Civ. like he's like Civ, just he just won't play a show with a barrier, and if he does, it's like he's just gonna be bitching about it on stage, and like yelling and screaming, and but like
He was bitching about it.
yeah, and like I've done that on stage, and my bandmates in Fiddlehead, they're like, hey, come on now, just you're killing the vibe. And listen, I get it. Like we did some barrier shows with Citizen last year, and like like the venues that they're playing mandate barrier. There's not much we can do with that, but I know that I can jump in the crowd. I can be there with them, and you just feel super connected. And Citizen has like the best fans in the world, so like it's nothing on the people. It's just I yearn for the connection. And we did play this one show in LA with them, and the venue had this like weird like seating, no, not seating placement, but standing placement. You could pay extra to be closer to the stage, and like a lot of Citizen fans did that, but the Fiddlehead fans that were there to just see us, they were like, well, I don't want to pay extra. I just want to go to the show. So it was like this really weird empty pit. Like it was a barrier, and then there was like an entire stage just sort of like kind of empty. But then all of our homies were like in like the general area. And so I made sure the mic cord was long enough, but I like basically like it was on like the other side of the venue, just like to try and get to our beloved fiddleheads, as I call them. But yeah, that was it's not the end of the world, and like there is a type of music out there. You don't need, like, it's okay if there's a barrier. There's some music where it's like you just want to you know, like hop up and down and just sort of like see the band, and that's all fine and well, but like that's just not the cloth that I was cut from.
So, kind of going along with what you're saying about Fiddlehead, because we've kind of been jumping around a little bit, what
Yeah.
would you consider like your greatest accomplishment? Like
with,
with
with Fiddlehead. You know, that's a good question. Um, hmm. I think that the greatest accomplishment is that the five of us all really love each other. Like it is like it's very difficult to write that many songs in a democratic way that we do, and to have like it's almost more difficult the way in which we play because like it's not this like this is all our career. We're out these months. It's like are you here there? Can you do this there? Can you do this there? And it's a lot of like, oh God, I gotta like I usually like go to work um and on like a Friday and I'll work maybe like a half day or work the full day and I'll like race to the airport to get, you know, to Denver so I can make the Denver show. And then, you know, like we'll do like a weekend there and like I'll take a red eye that Sunday night, like leave the venue Sunday night, race to the airport so I can do a red eye and get back to work on that Monday. And likewise with the other guys, they all have their other priorities too. And we somehow managed to do that with like still like really enjoying ourselves. Like we just have a good time. We're just like laughing the entire time. We just did this Northwest weekend and we were just still buzzing about it. Like there's just so much laughter. And we like the music, the last record that we wrote. We were all like, oh, this is great. This record totally flows and it feels like we've just kind of captured something that really kind of like rounds out everything we've been doing with like the previous two records. Our live set feels like this like kind of like journey and we can pick and choose now and like you know there's no real bad vibes. We have no goal with the band. You know, I don't know what we're doing now. I don't know what we're gonna do. Like, you know, and that's the joy. And I think that to me is like a real accomplishment to like avoid the typical temptations. We've had opportunities and you know signals to like, especially with the way in which like hardcore punkish music is be kind of it's become kind of like popular and it's like you know you know you could you we could do the things that you could do to like play Coachella. We could you know find the right people if we wanted to and you know take up the offer we've been given like here and there to get you know just to do those things that like seem to matter to people. And like we just dropped was it like Furnace Fest or something like that. Yeah, the Furnace Fest was like you can't play or we were playing and then they were like you can't play if you're gonna play Atlanta, you know, like a month and a half prior. It's called a radius clause in the music industry.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, like we were like, yeah, you know, like we'd rather play the small show in Atlanta. So they're like,
I thought
you know,
Furnace Fest was in Alabama.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, hey, you're preaching the choir. It's kind of a long distance.
Yeah.
Atlanta, I mean, Atlanta's actually pretty close to Birmingham, but I think it was also because we were playing like Nashville and we were playing North Carolina, and so they were like, "You're playing too many dates, and that's going to detract from people coming to see you. So we don't want like you. We're saying that you have to pick our festival or your like three small shows, and we were like pretty easy like yeah we'll just take the smaller shows because like you know you're going to set us up in front of a barrier, you're going to take our merch money which something that venues do, which is like come on now like you know the way in which artists like already don't make money to go up to them on tour and be like hey you're in our venue, you owe us like 10% of how much you made on your merchandise. It's like oh my god, like the merchandise is like it's gas and it's like you know rent and mortgage payments. So we were like no thanks Furnace Fest, we'll see you later. That's cutting news by the way. I don't think
Well, yeah, and I feel like the thing about like those big festivals is like you're not going for one band. I feel like every band on there like kind of helps. Like with these smaller shows, you're going for Fiddlehead. Furnace Fest, it's like, oh, Drug Church and Coheeding Cambria and Anxious. And it's like all these different bands just persuade you to go a little
Yeah.
bit more.
Yeah. So Samantha, that to me is like a part of the essence of like what I think is our greatest accomplishment. Like we just don't care about the materialistic stuff. And I have a funny feeling that we're gonna, knock on wood, but like we'll be in our 70s and 80s and being like, how you doing, brother? Like still friends and not like feeling like, like, oh, we could have made it. We could have been musicians, like we have really full lives. We all have like our own little careers, and life's more interesting. I got to tell you, being on the road is like it's not, you can do it, but like I personally find it can get real boring, and so I'm all set with that life.
Does everybody in Fiddlehead live in Boston?
No, we did at one point, uh, but that's sort of changing. So the Alexes, the both of the guitarists, they both moved to California during the pandemic. Pandemic really did a number on people. It made them think that moving to California would be a good idea. So our bassist Nick, he's from Maryland, Silver Springs. Is that
Yeah,
uh,
like an hour away from us. That's like basically DC.
yeah, that's how he describes it. Um, so he he was living in New York, which is close-ish to us. Um, but he lives in Austin now, which I was like, come on, man. But he's, the love of his life is there, so God bless. Alex Dow has decided to move back to Boston, so he's coming back. So we got three of us still here in Massachusetts, but Alex Henry, who's the basement man, turnstile, cinematographer, extraordinaire, and proper Englishman. He's staying in California, and the hope is that that will not happen anymore, and he will move to Boston. I just it was there was it was so great when we were all together because I live in a house that was built in the 18th century. It has like this big barn that basically is like a practice space. And we were all synced up. We were writing we were just getting together every week. It was during the pandemic for the years before that. It was great. We were just writing constantly, but the distance has gotten in the way of that. So, I don't I don't know. I don't know what's happened with us. No sign of like internal beef. It's just I'd like to get back to the writing. We got some riffs thrown around, but I think now that Dow's back in Boston, we're going to be writing again. So
Yeah. Well, Pat, I hate to cut it off here, but the three of us have school in the morning.
that's correct.
It was great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me. Keep doing this. I really really loved the interviews that you guys have done. The one with Ian MacKay was great.
Thank you. That's our magnum opus.
yeah.
Uh, you know, but I loved how like unamused he was with the fact that you folks are young. And I mean that in a way that was like, he just takes you seriously.
Yeah, the best ones were when we were being talked to like adults, even when we
Yeah.
were like 12 at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. Like now I will say it's a little bit easier because it's like we're kind of getting there, but like when
Yeah.
we're really,
You're-
young
you got a ways to go, just so you know.
but when people take you seriously and don't just try to talk to you like, you are a kid, it
Yeah.
definitely makes a world of difference.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
when when it was not like a 12-year-old asking you this question, it was just a question. That was
Yeah.
the best.
If I could be fair to the people who are like, for those earlier episodes that you did, you said you were like 12. I gotta say, it's not, it's very rare. Like, I've been going to shows since 1999, and like, I don't, I, I maybe knew a couple kids who were like, just doing it, like when they're like maybe like one or two. It's just uncommon. So I think some people were like I don't think that they were coming at it with like, oh, this is cute.
Yeah. That, that's
Um,
the funny thing though, is it didn't seem uncommon. Like in my
Yeah.
whole life, it's been like I think my taste in music started from just my dad playing stuff in the car, or my parents, and I don't know. So all of a sudden, it's like you don't think it's weird. Like everybody is listening to the Descendants and Ignite and like Vision, just because that's what you hear in the car.
yeah, I,
On the
I
way to
got I,
school.
I got a question. So I have children. I have a 5-year-old. He just turned 5, and my daughter's just about to turn 3. And I want them to like whatever they like, truly. But I do think that there's something special about hardcore and punk that is like that. There are certain bands like the Embrace record. It's like just it's just been like a source of like, I don't know, like survival in my life, and it's just been so enriching in my life. There's some Ignite songs that have like really transformed my life. The song um Taken? No, wait. Oh man. Okay, so you mentioned Ignite, and I got to tell you, there's an Ignite song. Oh man, Taken Away. That's it. I even have to look it up. You know what song I'm talking about?
I think so. Live for Better Days was always the main record, because my dad, he had a thumb drive that just had like all these different albums on it, and nobody would ever like plug their phone in. So Live for Better Days was always like the main album I was listening to.
Okay, well, do me a favor and let me know how it goes. This is the both of you, okay? Listen on headphones to the song "Taken Away" by Ignite, and just let me know how it goes. Just not a homework assignment. Just at some point in your life, say, "I actually listen." That song changed my life. I really, when I was in middle school, I remember hearing it, and it made me just go, "This is a music that is, I can't find this anywhere else." I still have never been able to find it, and it's so entrenched in like the spirit of like the early '80s, like bands like Uniform Choice, and but like it's called "Taken Away," and it's by Ignite, and if your dad's an Ignite fan, he's got to know the song. But it's very powerful, and it's rare, and it's uncommon, and I think it marks the specialty of the subculture. But my question is, I want I want my children to just do whatever they want to do. I want them to like what they like, but I kind of want them. I want them to like punk and hardcore because I think it can be good for the soul. Does the fact does playing it constantly, because does playing it not constantly, but does it make it not cool if your parents are playing it?
I think, like, because you said that your children are like 5 and like about to be 3, right?
Yeah.
So I think at that point in life, it was like whatever my mom played, kind of like Dom was saying, I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is the stuff. You know what I mean? Because that's like all you're
Yeah,
exposed to.
this is what everybody listens to.
Yeah,
Okay.
because like that's all you know about. You don't have like your friends at school being like, "Oh, listen to this album that just dropped." Like it's kind of different when you get to a certain age, but I think when you're younger, like that's the first influence you get. But I think there's still an element of like you like what you like. So I don't think that there's any harm in like exposing them to like the scene that early.
For me,
Okay.
it was just kind of, the appeal was like it was kind of like an unspoken thing, like we're
Yeah.
we're driving to school listening to the Descendants, but my dad isn't like, you should know this band because
Right.
they're the seminal like California punk
Yeah.
rock band.
Yeah.
No, it's just
Yeah.
It's the
Okay.
Descendants playing, and then you feel like you're. I mean, you do go down your own paths at that
Yeah.
point. You find this one band and you take it and run, but you know, you feel like you're planting that seed yourself in your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think like, my dad put me onto this.
Yeah.
It's just the unspoken like, just this the music that's playing.
Yeah. Cool. I think all of this is so from a historical perspective, it's very fascinating. I was really intrigued, just like with the interview with you and that you've done with so many people. It's so great. The John Brandon episode, that was a great one.
Thank you.
Uh,
That one was really funny booking because
Yeah.
you know who Scott Crawford is? He made the documentary Salad Days.
yes. Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, we ran into him in Baltimore
Yeah.
when we saw the Circle Jerks in 2021 and Negative Approach was opening. And we ran into Scott and he was like, "Oh, I gotta you guys gotta meet John Brandon so you can try
Yeah.
to interview him." And John Brandon is pretty inebriated and he's holding a beer and he's like, "You want an interview?" And just starts yelling his phone number at me.
Like
Like
loudly in front of everyone.
like
We were both
the
like,
merch table and there's all these like Negative Approach fans like waiting to get their records signed, like listening to him just yell his phone number at us.
Yeah,
it
that's
was
great.
yeah, it was definitely a funny experience because like we said, like starting the podcast when it was like the pandemic and it was like you couldn't just go see these bands. And then we was literally like, "Oh, you want to do an interview?" Like as we see him, we're just like booking this. It was so funny.
That's what we did with Jeff Nelson too. That was really
Yeah.
funny.
Oh, I got to listen to that episode. Um, I find him so fascinating. But more importantly, what I find fascinating is, this is a music scene that has somehow survived. The music scenes have died. Ska. Are you into ska?
I like a lot of ska.
I only say because you mentioned like, Less Than Jake played and
Yeah.
you're.
Oh yeah, my one of the albums my mom used to play a lot when she was pregnant was Ska Boom by the Toasters.
Okay.
That was
Nice.
just
Uh,
ingrained in my mind
yeah.
from utero.
I in the I was super into that ska, Epitaph, Fat Records, early Vagrant Records, music ska scene when I was like really, really young. And I went to a couple ska shows. I might have gone to a Toasters show. I'm not even kidding. But there was a ska scene. And it was like, there would be hardcore shows and there would be ska shows. And I kind of laugh at the thought because like that just went away. They're like, like there's so many scenes and genres of music that kind of like pop up and then they go away. This is a completely like global thing that's spread. And like, so when you get, like a younger generation speaking to like straight up like founding stuff, I just think it's so important in order to kind of keep cultural stuff live. And that's why I really celebrate what you guys are doing here. And like, um and not because like you're young, but it is like generational building. And I think that might be why some people, we're fascinated. Like let's get a young perspective on this and see what questions they have. I think you just keep doing it. Also, like, good luck on the AP exam. But
Thank you.
don't worry about the score. It's a bunch of hooey sometimes. So
All right,
uh,
well, thank you, Pat.
Thank
yeah,
you.
I'll see you guys in August. All right. And you're on the Fiddlehead guest list for life. All right.
Thank you, thank you.
Don't ever buy a ticket. Just show up and say, I interviewed Pat. He told me about the AP US exam. All right. Okay. Good luck. See ya.
Yeah.